Okay, who's been to protest in Hong Kong here, if anybody? Okay, that's fine. Who knows friends who've been in protests? Okay, I think if we polled all of our friends, we'd have a really big portion of people who've been to protests in Hong Kong. So how did this start, right? How did I start to think about this topic? Actually, a few weeks ago, a good friend of mine was on the school bus with some primary kids here. The primary kids were not older than 8 years old. She overheard a group of them saying some very angry comments for 8-year-olds. What were they saying? Down with CY Leung. Learning the wolf is ruining Hong Kong and letting all the mainlanders take over. We need to protest until CY Leung is removed as chief executive. Now, I don't know you, but when I was 8, I knew nothing about CY Leung. Well, I guess we wouldn't know anything about CY Leung when we were 8, but I knew nothing about who the chief executive was or any politics. But if you watch news coverage of protests today, a good third of the protesters are probably around our age, primary children, or worse, babysitting in baby prams. And so today, I think there's a problem with the protest culture in Hong Kong. If you go on Facebook or any of the local web forums, you can quite easily find a range of past and upcoming protests. What we have, for example, New Year's Day, Labor Day, Hong Kong SAR Establishment Day, National Day, Christmas, and back to New Year's Eve. We protest about everything here in Hong Kong. The building of a new railroad system, expansion of a garbage dump, a planned garbage incinerator, establishment of a country park, rising beef prices, big companies controlling our economy, too low a minimum wage, influx of mainland tourists, bad television, pharmacies lacking the milk powder with the most DHA for our babies. Heck, we even protest when the new government welfare budget won't pay us $6,000 per person just for sitting around and, protesting. So today, I'm not actually speaking against protests, but I think that the average protester in Hong Kong, and I think for a lot of Hong Kong students, we really should be thinking of where we are going to go with the issues that we care about and how best it would be to get there, protesting or not. So my first part, do you actually know what you're protesting about? Did you know you can hire a professional protester in Hong Kong? Tabloids and magazines journalists have covered this recently and reported that the pay is between $100 and $300 per day. More if you're willing to lead cheers, to not wear a facial mask, or hold banners. That's good money for a day's work, I'd say. I'd bet you that $300 that these professional protesters get, that they actually know nothing about the thing they're protesting about. Okay, now let's consider the layman protester in the current debate of democracy and universal suffrage, which I'm guessing affects many of us who might be ethnic Chinese Hong Kong permanent residents. I remember last week that when the government launched its consultation period, people were already yelling at the supposed false intentions of the government officials. I can understand that many Hong Kongers may feel quite touchy on this, as there's certainly a feeling of an identity crisis in that we have never really seemed to be able to fully govern ourselves. And that's why we're so touchy on democracy, on being able to govern ourselves. However, the reality is that if we really value the rule of law as protesters, we should avoid the generalizations and exaggerated claims in the media. I'd think that we all actually have a lot of homework to do as protesters. Who here can declare themselves an expert in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, the Basic Law, or the decisions of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, all of which actually have a binding effect on our constitutional reform? And now suppose we view the government and Beijing as our enemies in this fight for democracy, which really shouldn't be the case because they are the people who have the power to give assent to our reform. The way to win this isn't by making larger noise and swearing at protests, really. If everyone protesting is able to explain their views on democracy in an informed, practical manner, we'd actually generate much more positive discourse that actually is valued and will actually create pressure on the government. So my first point is, make sure you know what you're talking about. My second point is, are we really that unhappy and are we really that angry at the society and at our government? Just on Saturday, I watched the news and a few protesters were hurling eggs at the chief executive in a consultation forum. If you compare this on an international level, it might not feel so special. We all know of Bush being thrown a shoe at, and if you're in the UK, you know that Thatcher, Blair, and Cameron were all victims of egg hurling. But think about this. The average Hong Kong resident here in this beautiful city of ours actually has probably fewer grievances to complain about than someone in the UK. On a whole, we perform quite well. We have a very high per capita income, low unemployment, high human development, high quality of life. And more than that, right? Primarily, protests start from when people have economic pressures, which generates social problems. The average worker in Hong Kong gives at least half as much tax than the worker in the UK. Any of our teachers will be able to attest to that. We also happen to be holding on to China's great development. So why are we actually that unhappy? Because by throwing eggs at government officials, we are worsening the political environment of Hong Kong and contributing it to being a system characterized by continual quarrels and unrest. The effect of this is we have a very populist government that bows down to pressure and does policies just to impress people when they might not actually be good for our society. And that's the second aspect. Before you complain, before you protest, actually think about it. Are we really that unlucky, that unhappy, and that angry that we're willing to drive our government into a position that it's very weak and we'll just stand back and follow what we pressure them to do? Now, thirdly, are you willing to give it everything? So would you, as students in Hong Kong, be willing to join Occupy Central next year? On the weekends, maybe? Yeah, perhaps. I'd spend a day, maybe some of my friends would, sitting in Central, protesting, asking for democracy. Sounds perfectly reasonable and sounds perfect way to spend my Saturday afternoon. How about on a Monday? As long as it is a weekday, I contend you wouldn't have more than 200 people standing on the streets of Central. For most of us, sitting in a protest isn't worth losing our jobs or getting into trouble at school over. Or take another example. I was quite amused when there was a campaign to boycott the local channel TVB on the night of its launch of its anniversary celebrations this year. Everybody said, hey, the government is refusing to issue more TV licenses, so what are we going to do? Boycott the current channel we have. However, the next day, everyone went back to watching the newest drama series. Why? It's simple. It's a matter of sacrifice and commitment. So if you want our movements to be successful, right, whether they're protests or not, or advocating, or politics, we need to break away from the sheep mentality of, hey, everybody's protesting, so let me protest. Everybody's doing this. No. You actually have to think about what we're inspired by and where and how far are we willing to go to get it. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is why don't you do something about the issue instead of complaining? So I'm a diploma economics student, so I like to think about how community resources can be best employed to our communal benefit in the context of social costs and benefits. For protests, this is the time and resources incurred by protesters and what they could be doing instead. I've already told you that the protesters are being paid up to $300 a day. So for now, let's just imagine they're paid $200 per day. 5 or 6 hours of work. Now, there are over 3,800 protests a year in Hong Kong. That's over 10 a day. An average of 200 people per protest, which is a grossly low number. There are probably protests, in the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands. But think about it. If we have 200 people per protest, 3,800 protests a year, and $200 for every protester, that's $152 million worth of protesting time a year. I'm not saying that all these protesters are actually getting paid for their jobs. There are definitely people like you and I who very well could care about the issue. But I'm saying that their time can be used into better quantifiable purposes. For example, our issue of trash. Now, like it or not, Hong Kong is running out of space for the tons of trash that we throw out every day. We've almost shoved the government in a corner. We protest against landfills, then we protest against incinerators, then we protest against a garbage tax. So frankly, if I was a politician, which thank goodness I'm not, I'd be telling the people of Hong Kong that unless you want to be piling hills of garbage outside your front door, you better accept the lesser of evils and disapprove of expanding landfills for the short term. So, okay, if these people accept that, okay, say 1,000 people stopped protesting for a day and spent the 4 hours that they otherwise would be protesting volunteering in building urban green space, or picking up garbage, or sorting out recyclable materials, or making recycled products, we would be generating much more social benefits. At least, probably, saving $152 million. So what I'm saying today is that ultimately, there are better uses of the time than just complaining when it might not actually have much effect. And that when we're considering issues that we're passionate about and raising awareness about it, it's also equally important to think about whether we ourselves could get involved into the action. We ourselves could help remedy the problems and think of new solutions. And for that, for me, right, if you're protesting about garbage, think about yourself, stop producing garbage, stop producing as much garbage, recycle, reuse, and all that. And I think that step by step, when we think about our own action and behavior, instead of complaining about what's happening on a world level or on a Hong Kong level, we can change ourselves. That gradually can change other people. Thank you.